Okay, so welcome back, and now we're going to talk about something called absolute value. And so before we jump in and explain absolute value, let's talk about distance, okay? So when we talk about distance, it's a physical property. So distance is always positive, right? I would never say I'm negative 3 feet from the wall, or I'm negative 13 miles from the nearest grocery store, or something like that. I would not talk like that, right? So distance is a physical property, so it's always positive, just like area is always positive, volume is always positive, time is always positive. So those sorts of things, we're used to having positive values. So when we talk about distance of numbers on the number line, okay, so the distance, for example, the distance between any two pair of integers, consecutive pair of integers, is always the same, right? So there's always like 1 unit difference, okay? So when we talk about distance, we are looking at how far one number is from another number, but it's always positive, right? We wouldn't say the distance between negative 3 and negative 1 to be negative 2, right? We would just say the distance is 2 units. And so this brings up the idea of absolute value, because absolute value is really the distance a value is from 0. Okay? So if I say, okay, what's the absolute value of 3? Well, how many units is 3 away from 0? Well, it's 3 units. So the absolute value of 3 is just 3. And so, or if I do the absolute value of negative 3, well, all I'm asking is what's the distance negative 3 is from 0? Well, how many units do I need to go from 0 to get to negative 3? And the answer is 3. So the absolute value of negative 3 is also 3. Okay? Positive 3. So that's the idea of an absolute value. So the absolute value takes any non-negative value. What do I mean by non-negative? Negative, anything that's negative or 0. Okay? Non-negative is either negative or 0. So if it's a non-negative number, it basically, or excuse me, what did I say? No, non-negative, I misspoke. Non-negative is positive or 0, okay? So if I take the absolute value of any non-negative value, which is again, 0 and any positive, right? Non-negative means not negative. Anyway, so non-negative means all the positive values and including 0, because 0 is neither positive nor negative. So that's why we say non-negative, right? So we want to include 0 in there. So non-negative are all the positive values and then also including 0. So the absolute value of any non-negative value or any non-negative number is just that number, right? But if I have a negative number, if I want the absolute value of a negative number, then I'm going to take the opposite value, or the opposite sign, in other words, of that value. So the absolute value of 3 is just 3. The absolute value of 0 is just 0. The absolute value of 10 is just 10. The absolute value of negative 10, now since it's negative, I'm going to take the opposite value of that. So I'm going to take the opposite of negative 10, which is positive 10. Okay, so do you understand how that works? Okay, so that's the idea and the thinking behind the definition of absolute value. Okay, and the idea of distance. Okay, now what about the technical or the way we denote it symbolically? So the absolute value signs are these vertical bars. So whenever we want to denote absolute value, we just put vertical bars around the number. So this means the absolute value of A. So the definition of absolute value comes down to 2 parts. Okay? Together. So the absolute value of A means this. It means that the absolute value of A is equal to A if A is greater than or equal to 0. In other words, non-negative. Okay? A is equal to the opposite of A if A is less than 0 or negative. So if A is positive or 0, the absolute value of A is just A. If A is negative, then the absolute value of A is the opposite of the negative value, which is again positive. Okay? And that's it. So we'll do some examples and we'll go forward.